Good evening. My name is Frank Gaffney. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger, China. We are coming to you tonight from Old Town Alexandria in the great Commonwealth of Virginia. We are here to talk about the present and growing danger posed by Communist China under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. We are a group of national security practitioners and subject matter experts, business leaders, individuals who are advocates for religious freedom and human rights, and together have a rather extraordinary set of skills that we believe have the potential to replicate in our time a very important effort mounted by a similarly named group in the mid-1970s. One of its members was Ronald Reagan, and that time's Committee on the Present Danger helped the then former governor of California articulate and socialize and ultimately secure popular support for an alternative strategy to what might be called today engagement with the existential threat to freedom of the time, namely the Soviet Union. It was at that moment called détente. And the policy of détente that was pursued by successive presidents of both parties had not materially helped end the threat from the Soviet Union. In fact, arguably, it simply compounded it by helping prop up the regime and underwrite its malevolent behavior. President Reagan, as he ultimately became, had a different vision. He thought it needed to be clear to the American people that détente was actually unproductive at best and at worst was definitely compounding that time's danger. And with the help of the Committee on the Present Danger, he defined a strategy that came to be called peace through strength. Effectively, it amounted to rollback of the Soviet Union when the president received a mandate to implement that strategy and then recruited some 31 members of the Committee on the Present Danger to join him in executing that strategy, which they did, to historic effect. Informed by that experience, inspired by it, and very much believing that something like it is needed today, our Committee on the Present Danger, China, has come together in order to hope and help the next commander-in-chief, for whom Communist China will be job one, make no mistake about it, whether it's in the national security arena, whether it's in the economic one, or perhaps those two and the public health space. What the Chinese Communist Party has been doing is going to be the preoccupation of the occupant of the White House in 2021 and beyond. We think it's important for the American people to know what that next commander-in-chief thinks about China, whether he or she recognizes the threat that it poses to us today and will in the future, whether they have a plan, most importantly, for dealing with that threat in an effective way. And we need to know that now. So we've come together, my colleagues and I, here tonight, in the seventh of what we call our 2020 Policy Battlespace Threat Briefings of the Committee on the Present Danger, China, designed to do two things. One is to inform the electorate in early states in which the voting has been taking place or is going to shortly. So far, we've been in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, Texas, just today, in Maryland, and now in Virginia. For the hope and in the expectation that by helping frame the issues that need to be addressed in this election season, not in a partisan way, but it's a matter of policy, we can inform the electorate and engage those who would lead them in the presidency of the United States. So that's the first mission. The second is in each of the states in which we have conducted these briefings, we have undertaken to engage those in the state governments, executive branches and legislative branches, to think about and reckon with what has been noticed most recently by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to the governors of the 50 states. And that is that they are being targeted, both as individuals and as leaders of states in this country, by the Chinese Communist Party. And specifically, the Secretary of State warned that their states, specifically their public pension funds, were being tapped by the Chinese to underwrite some of the malevolent activities that we will be discussing here tonight. That is not desirable, needless to say. Indeed, it is increasingly reckless and irresponsible. So our second mission is to try to help encourage corrective action with respect to investing in and otherwise aiding and abetting Chinese companies, including some that are doing very malevolent things. For example, building fortified islands in the South China Sea for the purpose of controlling that vital waterway, the $1 trillion worth of trade that goes through those seas and over them. Or proliferating weapons of mass destruction, for which some of these companies have been sanctioned. Or building the kind of capabilities that we'll be talking about tonight in terms of advanced techniques for repressing the people of China, something called the social credit system now. Or even, in some cases, Chinese corporations that are building military weaponry with which to kill Americans, our men and women in uniform, and perhaps the rest of us. For these reasons, we think it is ill-advised in the extreme for the U.S. capital markets, institutional investors, like pension funds, individuals, to be underwriting these sorts of Chinese companies and the Chinese Communist Party more generally. So that's our mission. We hope to have a comparable effect in the great choices that are going to be made this year, as did the predecessor to our present program 40-odd years ago. And we are doing it with the benefit of some extraordinary men and women, two of whom are here with me. I will introduce them in turn as they come up to speak. The first is Colonel John Mills. He is a retired United States Army colonel who has been the director of the cybersecurity policy strategy in the International Affairs Assistant Secretary's office in the Department of Defense. He's served now for some 35 years in various capacities in national security through the challenges of our time. They've changed over that period of time, of course, but he has served with great distinction and is a founding member, I'm pleased to say, of the Committee on the Present Danger, China. He's going to help us set the stage for an understanding of some of the threats that we are most vexed by and endangered by. And it's with great pleasure that I welcome John Mills. Thank you, Colonel.
That's right. We can do this. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here tonight, and everybody out there watching here. Frank and Shawn, it's an honor to work with both of you here. So when I first found out about this committee, it really I knew about the previous committee, and this was clearly something that was going to be compelling and impactful. So it was something I'm very interested in, and it was an honor to be part of this here as we stood this up here. So some of the things I'm going to talk about are related to what's known as the Belt and Road Initiative here. Most Americans probably haven't heard of it, frankly. In many ways, it's targeted a number of other countries and areas here. but it's actually also had an impact and influence right here in the United States here, and we'll get to that here. So it's just not foreign countries that have felt the Belt and Road Initiative. And what is the Belt and Road Initiative? It is really a massive influence operation here on a massive scale to assert the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party agenda and strategic objectives. They are all about agenda and strategic objectives here. So the Belt and Road Initiative is faltering in some ways because a lot of it has been dependent upon available liquidity of the country, which if you're watching the metrics here, the People's Republic has been in trouble for several years now, so they're really they're starting to dry up in liquidity here. But their primary tool has been essentially what we would call here in the United States is payday loans. Just very egregious loans under very egregious terms and conditions. But when those are offered to vulnerable countries, countries will just lunge at these opportunities here and just ignore the balloon payments and the debt that's due. And the PRC are very aggressive in exercising those terms and conditions, and there's been several examples of that. So this Belt and Road Initiative, more Americans need to become familiar with that here and understand what's going on here. One of the first times I even stumbled across it or understood it was really in roughly 2010. We were still kind of focused on the war on terror. We had transitioned to a new administration, but this topic came up. It wasn't exactly in my job jar at the Office of Secretary of Defense, but it was the Lodges Field in the Azores. Okay, well, what is that, and who cares, and what does that have to do with anything? Well, when the Gates memo, that was the efficiencies memo of 2010, when we started a dramatic downsizing of a U.S. national security spend, one of the first things everybody does in the services is savage and cut their O&M spending, which means shutting down bases. And everybody's going, Lodges Field, great during the Second World War, incredible, important to shut down the Nazi submarine threat, very important during the Cold War as a Strategic Air Command forward operating base for tankers and bombers, incredibly important when the president flew tanks and armored vehicles to Israel in 1972, couldn't have done it without Lodges Field. When we reached out to touch the Libyans in 1986, couldn't have done it without Lodges Field. 2010, it was irrelevant. Cut it. Air Force said, cut it. We got to save O&M costs. Well, guess who the first country that stepped in and talked to Portugal was? It was the People's Republic. Hu Jintao was still in charge, not as dynamic or aggressive as the current Secretary General. Let's always refer to him as a Secretary General. Okay, let's not use that complimentary title of president. But they saw an opportunity, and Portugal, needed that was big money to them. And when we looked like we were going to walk, the PRC jumped on that, and it took a little while to get people's attentions and get people refocused. But it took a little while here because most people say, well, yeah, come on, what does that have to do with anything? The PRC's on the other side of the world. Why would they want a base in the Atlantic? I mean, it's like, that's incredible. It's an incredible opportunity for them. It took a little while to kind of overturn that and turn that down, but we were this close to, instead of hearing the afterburners of F-111s and F-15s off of Lodges, hearing the afterburners of J-20s here. That would have been a very bad thing, very bad. So that really, as I was really focused on the war on terror, and I was actually the winding down, because I'd actually been asked to become part of a new cyber initiative, a comprehensive whole of government cyber initiative, because we realized threat actors were coming after us. And that's where I even learned more about the PRC, because the two main state actors were the PRC and Russia. But Belt and Road, it's all about influence. It's all about taking advantage. taking advantage of vulnerable countries, just like your payday loan in the United States, except on a massive scale. So where did they learn about all this stuff here? They learned about this from our magnificent statecraft that just went away at the end of the Cold War, just kind of evaporated. And so this is not a slight on any single administration or national security official or anything like that, but we had a magnificent statecraft starting with the Dulles brothers in the 1950s all the way through the Cold War. But once we kind of beat the evil villain of the world, all that stuff just kind of went poof. And we knew how to project influence for good, not for payday loans, but for good. And the PRC learned about that from us. They read our articles. They read everything. And I say that very seriously, but we've been a number of times, a number of us have been approached at conferences where PRC members quiz us about our own articles that we frankly don't even remember what we said or what we wrote. They read everything. They study us. I had an article in 2014, Whatever Happened to the Front Company, that talked about the magical statecraft we used to exercise and project. And it's been read. It's been read a lot, along with many other things. Just one more other thing. I can keep going for a while, Frank, however long you'd like me to go here. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that has been telling to me about the impact of the Belt and Road Initiative here is I teach a graduate program at a major university on cybersecurity, and I have a lot of a very diverse student body, a number of students from different African countries, a lot of different West African countries, and just because they're from West Africa doesn't mean they're always, there's different family, ethnic, heritage connections here, and so they're not always friends with each other, but if you mention the PRC, they all snap to attention and get motivated, and they are not happy, and that's, the PRC has brutalized vulnerable African countries, and we need to take care of that and do something about that, and we are starting to. Secretary Pompeo has been incredible here. But we need to really up our game, up our velocity, up our capacity on these things here. And this is all, we've left vacuums here. And the PRC has just stepped into every vacuum. Again, at the end of the Cold War, we walked away from world leadership. We're just going to kind of, and again, it's not a slight against any administration, but there was just essentially this evaporation of American statecraft. And it just hasn't returned. It hasn't returned in the capacity on the scale that it used to be practiced. It was very sophisticated. There is something called DIME, diplomatic, information, military, economic, and you can expand it to include finance, intelligence, law enforcement. We used to magnificently orchestrate that worldwide for good. And we need to return to that. But we've just walked away and created vacuums. They said, and vacuums and ambiguity create conflict. And we need to stop being ambiguous, stop creating vacuums. We need to defend. You can't be everywhere at once. Defend our vacuums, hold their vacuums at risk, and return to those days where we could, on scale, project influence for good. And we need to counteract the Belt and Road Initiative.
John, thank you. This is a drill down on one particular facet of the problem that we're going to be talking about this evening. It's gotten altogether too little attention. I think you're right. And the opportunities, we're also interested as an organization in trying to identify the things that we can do about the threat, not simply admire it or explain how serious it is. And we'll be talking more, John, in the dialogue back and forth about the sorts of things that resentment that has begun to manifest itself, as you say, towards the Chinese for their exploitation of these various populations, their I think of them as payday loans too. Debt trap is how it's often described. But the ability that that's given them to exploit both the resources, the strategic locations, and the infrastructure that they build in these countries, to the great detriment of the people in those countries, is an opportunity for us, it seems to me, as well. Let me introduce Dr. Shawn Lin. I've come to call him the Human Trifecta because he brings so much to these discussions by virtue of his experience in China as a student who was one of the survivors of the Tiananmen Square massacre. He is also a man who has experienced firsthand the oppression by the Chinese government of people of faith. He is a practitioner of Falun Gong, which has been singled out for especially horrific mistreatment by the Chinese. And he is also, as an Army veteran, initially as an enlisted man, rising to the rank of captain as a commissioned officer, with a PhD in microbiology, he became the director of the viral disease laboratory at Walter Reed. So he has incredible skills as well as insights into some of the most topical and urgent issues for us to discuss with the American people and those who currently represent them, particularly at the state level, as well as those who aspire to do so in federal office. Shawn Lin, welcome. I'm so appreciative of your contributions to all of these programs and look forward to your remarks tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank, and thank you, John. And really glad to speak up to John too, because you mentioned about the big infiltration operation as well. And so there are so many things we can review, regarding what Chinese Communist Party did to its own people. And Chinese people suffer so much in the last 7 decades under the communist regime. And the statistics already show more than 80 million of Chinese people die unnaturally under the communist regime. So if you average out, every year the Communist Party kills more than 1 million Chinese people. And so that's a statistic fact. And even just the 3 years from 1959 to 1961, more than 30 million Chinese people were starving to death under the communist terrible ruling in China. And the worst part is actually the Chinese Communist Party called it the Great Famine. They call it's the Great Famine caused by the natural disaster. But now if you look at the historical record, if you look at the historical records from so many different provinces in China, you realize there's no natural disaster, there's no huge snow or no tornado or any of these major farming. The natural factor is not existing there. It's just because the Communist Party launched a great leap forward movement, and they push the local people to, they call it compete and catch up with the United States and United Kingdom. So many of the local Communist Party leaders, they have to brag about how much agricultural product they produce in their farmlands. And they can brag about it. They say we can produce more than 10,000 kilograms of agricultural product from my 1 acre of land, even though scientifically it's not impossible. But the problem is that when you brag so much about it, then you have to submit a lot of the food to the central government. So the local leaders forcing the villagers give up all their own storage of all the foods. So many farmers left empty in their hands, no food storage, and they were forced to starve. And the local cadre covered up these lies, and they don't want these starving farmers to go outside the village to beg for food. They use the military to guard the village, to not allow the farmers to go out. So people were just forced to starve to death at home. And there are so much tragedies happening throughout China. And families, the parents eating their kids, all these kind of terrible things you never heard in the US, it happened in China, and in a wide scale. This is how Communist Party rule. They doesn't care about people's life. They lied about it and they covered it up. Just like the Tiananmen Square massacre. Nowadays, the government still lie about it. They only talk about, in Tiananmen Square, we didn't kill anybody. This is a public lie. But if you look at the reports from Western media, you look at some of the data that the U.S. government have, and also VOA reports on this situation, people know that there are more than 10,000 people died on the eve of the Tiananmen massacre. But the government keep lying. They said, we don't kill anybody in the Tiananmen Square because it happened in the night, and many of the civilians died on the road, on the way when they're blocking the military marching into Tiananmen Square. Many civilians died when the PLA opened fire. So the government said, we didn't kill people on the square. Nobody killed on the square. But on the square, we already know the government opened fire. When I was on the square on the night, when we withdraw from the square, we already hear them open the fire. And some of the bullet hitting the monument. It was so clear, hitting the monument, very clear. And many other students did not want to leave on the square because they think we want to hold on to the last ground of this demonstration. Many people actually slept in the tent. Those students did not leave, and they died. And later we saw reports, people talk about when the PLA, and the next morning when they wipe out the whole Tiananmen Square, they clean the ground, all the blood sheddings disappeared, and you cannot see what exactly happened. So, and even I witnessed, the tank rolling people's head when after we withdraw from Tiananmen massacre. So there are many terrible things the government have done to the Chinese people, and the killing, in couple with the lie the government put out together, it's a complete system how they can grab on their power. And there are so many times the Communist Party already on the brink of the collapse, but amazingly they have this great resistance to survival. They will find all kinds of ways to grab the powers. One day they were criticizing the United States. They were the enemy fighting the United States in the Korean War. They were mobilizing all the propaganda machine against the United States. And the next day when they see an opportunity, when Nixon and Kissinger reach out their hands, they suddenly praise the United States. The United States is the best friend of the Chinese people. Because when U.S. had a relationship, recognized the PRC instead of Taiwan, they can tell the Chinese people, see, the Western world recognize us now. We did a good job. And that's how they survive. The Communist Party always lie. If you ever one time believe it, you will learn a very hard lesson from it. And just like the Belt Road Initiative you mentioned, so many countries believing the Chinese government helping us, building our infrastructures, give us these loans without conditions. Of course, there are corruption behind it, and they know about it, but they feel this is a good wish, at least on the surface, right? But no, they are looking at your infrastructure. They want your port. They want to turn into a military base. There are always strategy behind it. And even for WTO too, when the U.S. gave China opportunity to join the WTO, many people hope China will change into a more transparent, open society. But Chinese government can make any promise on the paper. When Premier Zhu signed the WTO agreement, his subordinate was really stunned because they think for a premier it's impossible for them to agree on this term. But Premier Zhu just signed, everything signed. And then they just don't have to fulfill their promise. It doesn't matter to them. They just take this opportunity to take the goodwill from the Western society and then take your intellectual property, take your technology, take your financial, support. All kinds of ways they can take advantage of this system and then make China economy boom. And then in turn, they tell the Chinese people, see how good we can lead China to have an economy boom. Right? But they didn't fulfill their promise. And that's how the Communist Party keep cheating inside the Chinese people and cheat outside to the Western world. And all their care is how they can grip the powers. And when they persecute so many religious groups, they also lie first. They for example, when they persecute the Falun Gong practitioners, they have to label the group as an evil cult. Otherwise, they couldn't justify their persecution. And they had to do it even after the fact. So in July 1999, they launched persecution against Falun Gong. 3 months later, they realized they don't have any law to justify it. And it was only because the Secretary General, Jiang Zemin, in July announced Falun Gong, it was a evil cult. That's just because one leader said it. There's no law justified it. So in October, they quickly passed a law saying, now we have an anti-cult law. And even in the law, they couldn't put the Falun Gong's name on it because there's no evidence Falun Gong is there. So that's how they lie. And when they find out that the persecution could not continue because they still couldn't mobilize people's hatred against Falun Gong, so they staged a self-immolation on Tiananmen Square massacre. Also again in Tiananmen Square massacre, and that's in January 2001. So they put a few group of people and then let them on the square and let them self-immolate it. They probably cheating them in advance, selling just a stage show, but actually a few of them actually die. And they filmed it. And then they broadcast nationwide saying, see, Falun Gong causing people to self-immolate. This is evil cult. That's how they mobilize the whole country against a large group. Yeah. But now when people analyze the video, it's so bizarre. You know it clearly it's a staged performance because in such a large Tiananmen Square, you can even have a close-up of the person self-immolation. So you basically set up the camera waiting this guy to self-immolate. Because of surveillance camera can only take very far images on it. And when people analyze the CCTV broadcast self-image, you can see clearly a policeman was hitting one of the people on the square. So they knocked down that person and that person burned to death. So it was very clear, evident it was a staged performance. But people inside China don't know about it because Chinese government control all the media. So people's hatred were mobilized against Falun Gong. That's how Communist Party can carry out a persecution. And when they want to crack down on Muslim Uyghurs, they always say have to link them to terrorists. They say there are terrorists rising in Uyghur, in Xinjiang area. Now we have the obligation to put so many Uyghurs into concentration camp. So it's lie after lie, lie cover different lies and layer and layer. So in that way, many Chinese people were forced to support the Chinese government. So they always say, you see, we can lead China into a miracle of our economy rising in China. And that's how glorious Chinese Communist Party can do. But they didn't tell the Chinese people how much trouble they cause, how many times they bring Chinese economy to a brink of collapse. Right? Only when the Communist Party loosen up, without too much grip on the Chinese people, when Chinese people's own creativity come out, the Chinese society recover a little bit. Just like at the end of the Cultural Revolution, when Communist Party realized they cannot no longer rule it that way, they loosen up a little bit. That people own, then people can lease the farm. Now Chinese people start to recover their agriculture. When they allow people to own their own enterprises, you can see Chinese business start to booming. Chinese society start to have private enterprise again. And that's how Chinese economy recover. It's because Communist Party loosen up their greed. So there's lies after lie the Communist Party did to the Chinese society and telling the world too. And now with the coronavirus is another lie. They cover up the identification of the cluster outbreak even as early as November now. Now it can be tracked back to November, and then in December last year, they also identified cases that the people got infected, and has nothing to do with the Huanan seafood market. And even now we have evidence saying that they got the full virus genome as early as December 27. And it was actually contracted done by a company in Guangdong. It's called Guangdong Yuanshi Jing. So it's one of the genomic companies that do sequencing in Guangdong. They got a full genome sequence already on December 27, and the company brought the sequence information to Hubei province, to Wuhan, to telling them, we already identified new virus, all these things. But the local authority decided to cover it up. They even ordered them to destroy the samples, totally cover it up. And at the same time, they try to quench the concerns from the internet too. That's how Dr. Li Wenliang and 7 other his fellow doctors got brought into the police station, interrogated and forced them to silence. Even though they clearly tell the local authority that we clearly know there are SARS-related outbreak because the testing keeps showing positive for SARS. So the government covered it up from November to December, and then in January, when the government know this is happening already in large scale in Wuhan, they still encourage people to have these huge parties with more than 130,000 people in the community, and you facilitate the spreading of the virus, and you already clearly know it's human-to-human transmission. And when the central government sending expert team down to Wuhan, the second group come down there, the local authority also gather together, find a way to cover up the situation, cheating the central medical expert as well. They find different way to cover it up. So that's how it got further spread out in Wuhan. And eventually, the central government realized this girl is so big they cannot cover it up. So they sent out one doctor, the Dr. Zhong Nanshan, who was actually contributing in controlling the SARS in 2003. Now they make him to speak out, telling the people that in Wuhan has an outbreak and it has potential human-to-human transmission. And now this doctor, recently he was forced, even today the news, he was forced to help the government too. Now he has to tell the world saying, yes, the outbreak happened in China, but the origin of the virus may not be in China. So they now fabricate the story. It's another propaganda scheme. And so they want to tell the Chinese people, even though we use draconian measure, even though we put so many people in hard quarantine situations, even though there are so many people cannot get medical treatment and die because of lack of treatment or cross-infection in their family. So many family after family, whole family die in this process. But they can still tell the Chinese people, see, we are the country that can have the courage to use this draconian measure to lock down a whole big city with more than 15 million people. And we are the courageous government. And you see other countries still have outbreak now, they cannot control it either. So we are the one doing better for the Chinese people. And so they are fabricated a story, and then they start to blame the United States. They blame the United States didn't control the pandemic H1N1 well, because even they originated from Mexico, but U.S. didn't do a good job. So the pandemic H1N1 actually spread out globally. That's the fault of the United States. And now they think they can have a way to twist the story, so make Chinese people start to hate the United States. They said that the virus could be engineered by the United States, even though the whole world is questioning about the Wuhan Institute in China, because this is a lab has the capacities to do a lot of engineering on coronavirus, whether it's bad coronavirus or human coronavirus, and they have clearly established so many lab culture. Bad coronavirus strain, and one of the strain is RATG13. It's a very high homology with the identified SARS coronavirus 2. It has 96% homology, and with key mutation in the virus S protein. And this S protein mutation is very similar to the S protein from penguin's coronavirus. And this coronavirus, it was identified in Guangdong 2 years ago. So the Wuhan Institute who have very good collaboration with this institute and getting this virus strain and do lab engineering as well. So they have a lot of potential, but of course the world need more opportunity to go into Wuhan to investigate. But Chinese government keep rejecting the US scientists go to China to investigate where is the origin of the virus and what is the result of animal sample testings in Wuhan. There's no even one single testing result coming out of the animal samples from Wuhan. The government's covering up things. Everybody knows Chinese government is covering up, but they say we don't. They keep denying, and they can block your access to it. And after 2 months, many of the evidence probably already washed up. When the Dr. Guan Yi from Hong Kong went to Wuhan in middle of January, tried to find out the animal sample studies, and he went to the Huanan supermarket. He said, everything's already clean. The crime scene already washed up. What can you find? It's too late. Now 2 months later, even they now allow the US scientists go to Wuhan, they probably couldn't find anything because even the Wuhan Institute virologists already under military control for more than 1.5 months now. They can wipe out all the evidence now. And they can send out many medical reports to make the whole situation complicated and feel like so many strains popping up in so many different parts of the world and very hard for scientists to track it down now. So that's why this afternoon I mentioned to the Chinese Communist Party, it doesn't matter how many people die of the infection, whether it's Chinese or outside China. To them, it's just a static number. If more people die outside China, they will be happy because now they can justify this virus just too hard to control. Other countries cannot control it, and we probably do even better. Yeah, that's the nature of the Communist Party. So anyway, I'll probably talk too much. But just,
not at all. But you've covered a lot of very important ground, and I appreciate it because I think it is important for us to reflect on a very unpleasant reality, and that is that a government that is as brutal to its own people is unlikely to be very charitable towards ours. And we sort of take it for granted that, we'll all be, treated in a sort of civilized way by other nations. This is an object lesson, and you've given us several different examples of it, Shawn Lin. I'd like to just have a bit of a conversation with you guys about a couple of things that either we didn't touch on at all or we did, but it might behoove us to discuss a little bit further. You mentioned the Azores as an example, John. The purposes for which these acquisitions, shall we say, these payday loan-driven debt trap productions, is it to acquire strategic real estate in choke points around the world that give them a material advantage if it comes to blows? Is it acquiring materials, raw materials, or minerals, or rare earth and others? Is it having an ability from these places to engage in things like espionage and, as you say, influence operations for sure? Is it some combination of all of those? Is this one big, giant chess or game of Go, maybe, that the Chinese are playing? And has it been going on for more than the past couple of years and we've just not been paying attention, or is it really ramping up now, despite the liquidity challenges?
Yeah, it's been going on for many years. This is a strategic plan. I never liked that concept of go, because that's always implies that they are so strategic we couldn't possibly understand their sophistication. In international affairs, there's a lot of winging it, okay? Because you just can't control things that happen. Coronavirus. So you have to, that's part of our strength, is our resilience and our ability to wing it, because we have
adaptability.
Adaptability. Yeah, the informal term is wing it. But we're good at that. But it's all of the above. And this is strategic, this is long-term, they have sat in awe. They watch us, and our ability to generate and project influence through all instruments of national power is awe-inspiring to them. And they're still not there on this. They're very awkward, oafish, unsophisticated, and this is where they very easily rub who should be strategic partners. And again, I always like to look at this from my long-term training. Special operations imperative number one is absolute number one priority is friendships and partnerships. Because you never know when you'll need a favor or they'll need a favor. That's special operations rule, always number one. They don't get that and they don't understand that.
And they're not practicing it. And what they're doing to sort of exacerbate it too, as I understand it, is that they're bringing essentially all of the labor that is required for building ports or airfields or train networks or roadways from China. Lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, just down to the prostitutes, I'm told, even are imported. This is really rubbing people in these countries who had been expecting that one of the upsides for them was not only getting this infrastructure, but that they would be benefiting from an employment point of view, training people, and so on. And is that, again, I want to get to the point of, is that an opportunity for us to gauge with these countries
Absolutely.
to their detriment?
Absolutely. It's not just vulnerable, weak countries. It's even countries that are doing well that are curious and wondering, where are the Americans? I will take Panama as an example. And Panama, we created the Panama Canal. It was a magnificent accomplishment. It took us 10 years to build the Panama Canal. It took us 20 years to build the new off-ramp from 395 to the Pentagon. We're going the wrong direction in these metrics here. Magnificent world accomplishment, and we just walked away from it. And if people are not aware of what's happened, the Panamanians have massively and beautifully expanded the Panama Canal. It is still, and even more so, one of the most critical points of commerce in the world. The Panamanians are doing wonderfully. It is the Singapore of the Americas, and their question is, what happened to the Americans? Did they just disintegrate? Did they evaporate? Did they disappear? So even a wealthy country, where are the Americans? Where are we? Well, we've become very, over the last 20 years, we've just become very self-centered, self-focused, focused on
the war on terror and other places besides. And the Chinese have filled that vacuum massively in Panama as an example.
It is. And I know this, this is not, I know this investigator and research and talked with a lot of folks there. It's probably one of our most excellent first opportunities is to start re-engaging and start being more visible. This thing about us just hiding in the corner, I've done a lot of international work here. These partners are desperate for our involvement, for our leadership.
Yeah. Shawn, we did a program yesterday at the National Religious Broadcasters meeting in Nashville, Tennessee. And in part in response to the interest of the people that we were speaking with, of course, we talked about the repression of the faith communities. And you made a very interesting point, which I'd like you to share with this audience as well. In terms of the Chinese trying to engineer, I think you said it, the souls of the Chinese people, the Chinese Communist Party, that is, trying to engineer the souls of the Chinese people, and the various ways in which that's being done. I mean, breaking their spirits in a way, and not only taking down religious practices and substituting the party for God of various kinds. Walk us through that and some of the other techniques that are at work here and the effect that it's having on Chinese society.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a very systematic engineering of the Chinese Communist Party on the Chinese people. And so the Communist Party the communist ideology sneak into China in the early 20th centuries when the Qing dynasty collapsed, when Chinese intellectuals were seeking new ideologies, new way to make China prosper again. And so communists came in with the support of Soviet Union. And then they even established the government with the money from Soviet Union. It's kind of like Lenin borrowed the money from Germany. So it's actually when they established the party, and they established the government too, and it's a treason action, yeah. And then they start to grow. Communist Party start to grow, and when Chinese people was battling with Japanese invasion, the communists hide behind it, and then they make themselves grow stronger. So when they took power, first thing they do, they will already launch different persecution against so many different religious groups. And one example we mentioned yesterday is also like in Tibet. Within 2 years of Communist Party occupation, the Tibetan monastery dropped to only 75 left from thousands of monasteries. Only 75 left in 2 years. And nowadays in Taiwan,
were they taken over or were they destroyed by the Chinese Communist Party?
They destroyed. The temple's gone. And also in the mainland, they also have so many campaigns against different Buddhism, Taoisms. And right now, it's very amazing that in the whole China, the number of temples, whether it's Buddhist temple and Taoist temple, the overall number is almost equal to the temples in Taiwan, in a small island. So it's very systematic. They know when people have spiritual belief, when they follow the long time history in China, the people need to have harmony with the universe, with the deities, with the gods. They won't follow the violence path the Communist Party give to them, because they always instigate hatred among people, one class fighting another class. So this is in the ideologies of class struggle, right? The communists always emphasize class struggle. They created enemy within people, so one group fighting another group. Why? And so Communist Party it's very good at instigate hatred in the society. So when they want to target the intellectuals, they would say these are some of the intellectuals is against the country. And they say among the intellectuals, there are always a percentage of people are very bad. So they mobilize the larger group of people against a smaller group. Sometimes they even have quota. They say, all right, in your organization, you need to find 5% of people, they are anti-revolution. How do you know it's 5%? But it's a quota the Communist Party gave to people. So they threw this, for example, this political movement against intellectuals. So they first wipe out the intellectuals in the Chinese society who has a conscience, who has the courage to criticize Communist Party. Right? So when they target about the Buddhism, Taoism, or Christians in China, they also first wipe out the people who had the courage to disobey the government's crackdown. So through movements, all the Chinese people who have courage, conscience to criticize government gradually totally lost. So what you left is a mass who, under the fear, under decades of fear, they always following the governments. And when they cut off the Chinese people tied to traditional culture like the Confucianisms, people lost their moral standards. That's how they can encourage the young people to criticize their parents, betray their parents, and students beating their teacher to death in the Cultural Revolution time. So when you have this systematic way to allow people to rebel the tradition, they call it rebel the tradition because the tradition is all bad. That's how they teach in the younger generation. So the young generation Chinese people lost their connection with their heritage and even lost their moral compass. So now they feel, all right, as long as I following the government, any things I can do. You know, I can find any ways to support myself, any way to get rich, any way to, even in corruption, it doesn't matter. And that's why in China, it's kind of like joke, but it's a reality. They said if you line up every Communist Party member, if you execute every one of them for corruption, maybe you know, maybe misjudge one or few persons. But if you just execute one after another, you definitely miss a lot. Because everyone's corrupted because under their systems, everybody have to lie, everybody have to lost their moral compass in the Communist Party system. It's a huge diverse. And so in these systems, the corrupted Communist Party members actually has an advantage over people who have conscience. So in that way, when people in China gradually, not only the Communist Party member, the general folk gradually lost their spirituality, it becomes easy for Communist Party to tell them what to do. And that's why they also tell the Chinese teachers at different level of education, they always say the teacher are the engineer of people's soul. The teacher is not to help people understand the Tao. In traditional Confucius teaching and Taoist teaching, the teacher is the one who passing the Tao to the young next generation. But Communist Party, the teacher are the engineer. So the people are supposed to be the nut and bolts what Communist Party want. So you are a little part of their big machine. No matter where they put you, you need to work like a nut and bolt to support the machine operation. So you don't need to have your independent thinking. Right? So you don't need to have your own conscience too. You just need to follow the order.
Right. And engage as accomplices in criminal behavior, among other things. Yeah. Let me just add something to what I said earlier about one of the unbelievable facets of this problem, which is the degree to which it's enabled by us. We've been seeing some debate here in Washington, the Washington Metroplex, as I guess it's called, over the fact that we're now watching, John and Shawn, people like you facing the prospects that investments that have been made in your retirement through something called the Thrift Savings Plan for civilians as well as military personnel will be invested sometime this year in some of the Chinese companies that I was describing before. Never mind that these companies are not transparent, as I said, they're not disclosing their actual financial viability. There's no disclosure of material risk, let alone that they may be doing things as part of their business that are very dangerous for people precisely like those of you who've served in the uniform of the United States, and indeed the rest of us. But on top of it, what we've learned is that these investments are not necessarily remunerative. In fact, one of our colleagues, Chris Iacovella of the American Securities Association, recently wrote the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, pointing out that these Chinese companies and others in Morgan Stanley indexes have actually been 37% less remunerative than has the Standard & Poor's 500 over the past 10 years. How does it make folks like you feel that these sorts of things are being done with your money? And would you extrapolate from your own personal insights into saying how other Americans might feel as well?
Yeah, this is, there's one word for it, it's insanity. This is like during the pivotal years, 1942, instead of us rushing supplies to Great Britain, us floating a loan to the German regime. It makes absolutely no sense. But again, I think I put it in two buckets here. Lag time, strategic focus, and clarity. Lag time, we've talked about that. I've had a conversation with one of the board members from the TSP.
That would be the thrift savings
Yeah,
plan, which is what we're talking about, the
and
retirement
that's a
system of the federal
presidentially appointed board. The president does have influence over that board. There is a lag time, even with the experts. The PRC economy tanked 3 to 4 years ago, and yet there is still this unfounded, not fact-based view that it is a growth, because one of the basic comebacks, which is always, a board member will always say that, was fiduciary responsibility. Well, if that's the case, why are we flowing funds to an economy that tanked 3 to 4 years ago? This does not benefit the Chinese people, and we always, in our communication efforts, we always like to emphasize the Chinese people are our friends and allies. It is the Communist Party and the regime that is a danger and a threat. This does not benefit the people. The economy is tanked. The regime is desperate. They need liquidity. So lag time and focus. So even the board member was totally uninformed on current state of affairs. So lag time, focus, they're distracted. And I think as we do these communication efforts, we more and more educate the public, leaders in our society. Things have changed dramatically.
But there's lag.
There's lag time.
And we're not seeing it changing on the ground. In fact, we're seeing it doubling down in a way.
Well,
$500 billion, give or take, from the thrift savings plan is now moving into these kinds of investments.
These are not nice companies. Now, some experts will quibble a little bit about how much does this affect, how much does this really benefit, because then they'll start going into the machinations of the financial markets and what these really means. All of that in the end doesn't really matter. We are flowing funds to a thugocracy, and that is not right.
And an enemy being put a
They are. This is they
Let me ask
abuse
one
their
other
people.
question, Shawn, to you. One of the guys who was a prime mover behind this flowing of capital is a fellow by the name of Larry Fink. I've come to think of him as Larry Year of the Rat Fink, as a matter of fact. But he has been a champion of this kind of investing, institutional investors and others through things like the Morgan Stanley Capital International family of indexes. The interesting thing about this is that Larry Fink has been on record, notably at Davos just a few weeks ago, announcing that the management approach that he's taking and his company is taking is to give secondary importance to return on investment in favor of something called environment, social justice, and governance, ESG. I ask you, if $1 trillion or so enterprise like BlackRock, which runs this portfolio, is giving priority above everything else, including the return on investment to the beneficiary, to ESG, how can it possibly be that they're also insisting that they invest in China, given its performance on the environment, on social justice, and on governance?
Yeah,
Is
it's ironical.
Is it the worst country in the world in terms of those categories?
Yes, and actually the Chinese government will use the money to further build up the Orwellian-style surveillance state. And not only in the past few decades, Chinese government ruined the China's environment. This is also due to their ruining people's spirituality. Because in traditional his culture, people love to have the harmony with the nature, and the Chinese land is not like nowadays so much deserted lands, and people respect the land. Even we believe every land have their own deities. If you visit a mountain, you need to pay respect to the deity of the mountains. So there's no way you can wipe out the forest in so many lands. It's because communist take up people's belief, and you can say for governments needed for political movements. You can take out these forests in order to do certain types of farming the government want you to do. So it's just like waves of destroy of the lands, and many of the rivers were heavily polluted, and so much overbuilt of the reservoirs, ruin the natural environments. Even
coral reefs in the South China Sea, devastated by
devastated.
their islands.
Yeah, even the Yangtze River, people question about the huge dam or Yangtze River Dam because it's ruined the downstreams biospheres in the area as well. And then the government is definitely saying they will use the money to build a surveillance state even more stronger, because they can put AI technology, quantum computer, everything, make the surveillance even stronger. And now they have the technology to can even tell from your facial expression whether you have religious belief or not. Because people have religious belief that you have different facial expression, you have your own different muscles. They can tell you, and then they can justify, we need to track this person, and maybe one day put you into detention center.
This is the antithesis, one would think, of social justice, to have that kind of repression. Hypocrisy, I guess, is the most charitable way one could describe this dichotomy, but it is, in fact, an outrage, it seems to me, obscene. One of the interesting things that we've been talking about with one of our other colleagues, Rosemary Gibson, and I'd just like to visit with you guys because it's kind of a microcosm of a much larger problem. And that is, in a book called China RX that she published 2 years ago, Rosemary and her co-author identified as a huge vulnerability for this country the fact that we are dependent on China for, by some estimates, 80 or 90% of our medicines and other medical gear, gloves, masks, sanitary gowns, and the like. Her concern was twofold about this. One, that knowing the Chinese and how they conduct themselves, these products may be adulterated, which in the case of medicine can be fatal, or simply cut off. And I would invite you guys, you mentioned your concerns about the coronavirus, Shawn, maybe you could start with this. The implications if the Chinese, in fact, now, as I understand it, have stopped supplying American companies with the medicines, penicillin, vitamin C, masks, and the like, because they are now focused on trying to use them for their own crisis management. What does that mean for the healthcare system of the United States, in your estimation?
It's a problem that accumulated for such a long time, so it's hard to decoupling right now. So if the China political system decided to cut off the supply for some of the basic active ingredient for the generic medicines for U.S. market, of course it will be quite a heavy blow to the U.S. General public, because so many people need general medicines. Even some of the hospital, you need heparins, but those anticoagulants, these kind of reagents also produced by China. So definitely will.
Some of which have turned up, as I understand it, having rocket fuel in them, heparin specifically.
Yeah. So they have this long-time strategy. So what kind of industry they want to take? When they talk about they want to boom up the biotechnologies, it's not just simple. They think this is a new frontier of technology in the future that we want to become leading countries, dominate this market. It's more than that. They already think about, all right, which other countries' resource we can take. How do we speed up the process? How can we quickly establish the goal in the project 2025 or 2035? They already lay out what they can do without, too much awareness by the public, right? So they have the plan on the surface. They also have plan undercovered. So most of people only know on the written paper you want what you want to do, But the worst part is that they always have their secret missions. How do they can take over the world? The Communist Party's aggression in controlling the whole world never end, never stop. So I think it's really dangerous.
And it's absolutely clear that that is their purpose?
I think overall, they even for the engineering, when they put in the quantum computer and AI is behind the search engine, influencing the social engineering, their ultimate goal is also changing the human race too. So that's why it's matching with the Communist Party overall ideology. They want to expand to control the whole world. So if people turn into something they can easily socially engineer, it's much easier for the Communist Party to take over the whole world.
John, you have a background in cyber, among other things. How does the digital imperialism of the Chinese Communist Party factor into this ambition? 5G, fifth generation wireless systems as a prime example.
This is controlling the network. It's controlling the data and network on a massive scale, exponentially even larger than what we've evolved. The last 10 years have been breathtaking in the growth of networking capabilities, and this is taking it to an exponentially even larger level. I'd like to say something real quick here about food and safety, health safety issues here. The first time I was in China was right after 9/11. That's a story in itself. Things were going our way, Afghanistan. I was allowed to take a quick break, and we went to China. There was an expression, Chinese expression, that traces to the callousness and the psyche of the regime. At that time, there was a health crisis issue in China, and it was the use of formaldehyde in pickles that were sold. And our interpreters said there was an expression, not in our province. As long as it's not sold in our province, we don't care. But I think that traces to the callousness of the party. Who cares? Who cares about food product safety? Who cares about health safety? These are sacred foundations of our society here.
In short, who cares about the people?
Yeah, who cares about the people? And it is about a totalitarian regime that gets in their psyche. It's all about that psyche of an ascendancy. We are in an ascendancy. Bad things happen with totalitarian regimes who get that bug that they're in the ascendancy. But with IT, and this is where roughly 2007, we realized we had a massive issue with our cyber and IT capabilities, that although we were very good at using these project outward effects, we hadn't spent a whole lot of time thinking about somebody writing the rails back in and leveraging that against us. And who was doing that? It was primarily the PRC and the Russians. The PRC was using this as an avenue to exfiltrate value, intellectual property. You've heard about this over and over again. We're now experiencing the reaping of the whirlwind here, where we just for many years didn't care. And they have now just stolen so many things. It is just incredible the way they have manipulated U.S. companies, even down to the point of blocking when a U.S. company does a bid for a request for proposal of an American company, down to the case where they're blocking that bid. And then the company wonders why they never even won the bid. And then the other company says, well, we never received anything from you. Yes, the PRC was actively blocking. They are that involved down to that level.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Let me just ask, and I want to close with an invitation to each of you to talk about specific things that you would recommend we be doing to address the particular concerns that you've described and others. To the extent that we have a major public policy choice to make here, I have to say I'm somewhat heartened by some of the polling that we've done with John McLaughlin recently, terrific pollster, president's pollster, as a matter of fact, sampling 1,000 American voters, likely voters. And one of the things that we found was that overwhelmingly, I mean, like stunningly sizable majorities, favored a robust policy towards China. And the more they learned about the sorts of things we've been talking about this evening, the more that was the case. And even more impressive was the fact that that was true basically across all of the demographic subgroups that we were polling. So I think what that suggests is that there is a yearning on the part of the American people for policymakers who will, in fact, stand up to the Chinese and counter the sorts of threats we're talking about. So it's an environment in which sensible policy choices or recommendations, like those I think you both have, would, I think, probably resonate and may actually, as the poll suggested, be sufficiently important to these voters that they will determine the kind of people that they will vote for. In fact, John McLaughlin said of this data that it suggests that China is the sleeper issue of the 2020 election. And again, going back to what I said at the beginning, this is not a political undertaking in the sense of trying to get some vote for some candidate, but rather to get a popular mandate to address this problem comprehensively and effectively. So Shawn, let's start with you. Thoughts about specific things that the United States government or people, or both, could be usefully doing in an environment that, and by the way, I should have said this, that polling was done before a lot of the recent intensified concern about coronavirus. So I think it's only more the case that this sentiment is out there. What might be usefully done to respond to it and channel it in a corrective way?
I think this related to one key issues in China is that many people's voice was so deeply suppressed, and Chinese people were desperate. And you see in this outbreak of coronavirus too. And we see people, there are videos online showing people in Wuhan at night. They yelling, right? They yell out. And in this high-rising apartment, everybody yelled out. And it was very saddening to watch those videos because you can see the desperate people have. And at the same time, they have to watch the government's propaganda day and night, even though they don't believe it, because they can see their family, their friends dying, and they still have to watching this video. So what kind of depression you will have? And so I think it's critical that the true information get into China and let people have the way to bring their voice out. So in this way, the Communist Party will further lose its legitimacy inside China. So this is actually disintegrated the communism regime from inside. I think this is also very important and very strategic as well. And they also serve the fundamental issue is that even if we, for example, if we waging war or other tactics to win over PRC, but if the Chinese people are totally corrupted or totally being pulled down, depressed by the Communist Party, the country will suffer even more, right? And so that's why it's so important to quickly reach those Chinese people who now have the awakening. They want the freedom of speech. They want their own spiritual belief. Now you see China have more than 100 million underground Christians now. Because in such a desperate environment, many people wake up, they want this, want the spirituality, they want the freedom of speech. But just government cover it up, and this kind of news hard to get out. But they try to find different ways to reach out. So if U.S. government, U.S. public can find a way to support internet gadget companies, a little tool company that can help Chinese people jump over the Great Firewall, I think this is really, really important. And I hope U.S. president can be like President Reagan and tear down this wall, right? So the president should say to tell China, tear down this great firewall. I think this is really, really, really critical, very, very important for the Chinese people. And it helped the whole world as well. Yeah, I think I want to emphasize this one.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, just a few quick things here. Just a passionate resurrection of statecraft. We need just a total reconstitution of our training, doctrine, and our diplomatic force. But this is statecraft, the full spectrum, and we need to get into the active mode of communicating outward, not passively sitting back and being spectators. We need to passionately get out there and lead. Make it short and simple. These other countries have done a lot of international relations. They desperately, they want us to be active, involved, and lead. It confuses them when we sit back and are passive. Okay, we are the greatest force for good this world has ever seen, a liberal democratic republic. We need to get out there and tell our story, influence. Next is this concept, and I think the president has done it very well. This is a very deep concept. Some have poo-pooed him for this, but this is very deep. Fair trade versus free trade. We have surrendered sovereignty. I went to college in the early 80s. I was lectured over and over again of international free trade. Well, it sounds like sounds good. You know, we want to get the most inexpensive product from wherever. That assumes compliance. That presumes goodness on all parties. Fair trade is the correct way, okay? Because we've surrendered sovereignty. We don't have anybody who makes medical supplies in this country anymore. How did that happen? We don't have anybody, 80% of our pharmaceuticals. How did this happen? So fair trade. Next one, clarity. Clarity, clarity. We cannot create vacuums. It is always better, if you look through world history, it's always better to be clear with them. If we're ambiguous, totalitarian regimes will always push. Always push. We must be clear, and part of that is also deterrence. We must rebuild military and other capabilities to generate. We need visible, demonstrative ability to deter. And also, the center of gravity, and Shawn mentioned it, is really the Chinese citizens and the Chinese population. We must do whatever it takes to get information to them, to communicate with them. Very, very, I don't know how exactly historically accurate it was, but CNN, which at one time was kind of a different kind of station than it is now, the story of what happened when CNN came on in just a handful of hotels in Moscow. And first of all, the bellhops saw it, the desk clerks saw it. I go, hold on, did you see what they say? Did you hear what they just said? That's totally opposite what we hear on Pravda here. And that spread like wildfire. And that was a key influence. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't a grand strategy. Again, strategy is great. Planning is everything, but plans are nothing here. You got to be able to be flexible, adaptable. That took off like wildfire. So whatever it takes to support the populace of China.
Yeah.
Can I add one more thing quickly?
Quickly?
So, of course, now in the election year, people have debate about socialism, versus the free market. You remind me this. I would say, whoever, promoting the socialism, come to China, and you see in the Chinese Communist Party chapter, it's very clearly say socialism is the primitive stage of the communisms. There's never be an experiment for them. It's just a way to communism. Never be an experiment maybe on the purpose of have the society getting better. And there's never experiment like that. It's always a part of the process, go to communism. If anybody promoting socialism in the United States, if it definitely hurts someone like me who come to US for freedom and democracy. And I would say, if you promote socialism, better go to China, live in Wuhan, lock you down for 2 weeks. And then you can sense, and then if you can hear at night in your apartment building, then you can sense what it is communism.
Thank you, Shawn. Many good ideas. I think I agree with them all. Let me just add 3 as well. Obviously, we have to stop underwriting the Chinese threat. This is an opportunity, it seems to me, especially at a moment when we also ought to start seriously disengaging from China in terms of the kind of dependencies that you both have talked about. For those investment dollars that we have in our capital markets to be channeled towards American companies and American infrastructure building and American innovation and American research and development. And in other words, patriotic investing seems to me to be the alternative that should be espoused and actively pursued. As I say, it is, you've used the word insane for us to be doing so many of these things and remedying them, especially when it comes to ensuring that we have self-sufficiency in vital finished products, raw materials, rare earth minerals, and so much more, especially in the medical space. We're going to see this play out, folks, in real time here, probably in the next few weeks. It will be difficult for us to respond as swiftly as we need to, but we need to be about this, and that's where I think capital markets can be of help. Finally, I would just add one other thing, and Shawn, you alluded to it, I think both of you did. Part of the statecraft, I guess, but partly it's counterintelligence, counter-influence operations, challenging and thwarting the propaganda efforts designed to subvert us, demoralize us, paralyze us. I mean, these are all terms I think you guys have used. Confucius Institutes, as an example, instruments of controlling or at least shaping what people in our universities, or in some cases even lower academic institutions, are taking aboard about China, what they are exposed to about China. I dare say, in any campus in this country where you would have a Confucius Institute in place, you would not have heard anything about what we've been talking about. All of it would be verboten. Shawn, you and I in several of these conversations have talked about another egregious example where in major publications of the United States, like the Washington Post and the New York Times, sometimes the Des Moines Register and other places, you have so-called advertising supplements that are simply Chinese propaganda. And with the exception of the fine print saying advertisement up at the top, it would be not surprising if most people reading them just took it as part of the product of the paper, which says something about the propagandistic nature of the papers, I have to say, I guess. But this is also an insidious form of subversion that is totally unreciprocated, of course, in China. A step has been taken recently by the State Department to identify some of the engines for this propaganda in China, doing business as media companies as propaganda arms of the Chinese government. But I think these advertising supplements ought to be identified as such as well. So it isn't happening yet, but this is the chance in this election season to be engaging with elected officials, to be challenging them to establish what they know about the sorts of things we've been discussing here and what they would propose to do, hopefully informed by these kinds of suggestions about it, to contend with and ultimately counter the present and growing danger from communist China and its Chinese Communist Party. With that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for those of you who are here listening and for the chance to visit with you in this window before the coming super primary elections in this state and so many others. hopefully to inform the next commander-in-chief and to make good choices about their program, as well as to ensure that here at the state level, our investments are being made patriotically and not to the detriment of our country. Thank you very much. You can find this video at presentdangerchina.com, along with all of the other ones that we've performed over the past year, and I hope that you'll take advantage of those resources and so much more that you'll find at presentdangerchina.com. Good night.